Hello folks, my name's Lee Townsend and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video I'm going to be addressing a question that I get a lot in the comments section of any video that I make about these two products, and that is, what is the main difference between the Line 6 Pod Go and the Line 6 HX Effects? Before we go any further in this video, I'd like to ask you a favour. If you are interested in guitar and music related content here on YouTube and you get anything at all from my videos, I'd like to ask you to consider subscribing to the channel by hitting the subscribe link down below. It really does help the channel out, it helps these videos get seen by more people, and it costs you nothing at all to do. So if you're up for doing that, I would appreciate you a lot. But I'm not going to waffle on in this video like I did in the last one, because I did go on a little bit, but it had been a while since I made a video. So, main differences between these two, and I get asked a lot in the videos that I make about these things. Why are you using the Pod Go now over the HX Effects? Or why are you using the HX Effects now over the Pod Go? And the truth is, I'm not. I use both of them a lot for different purposes. And I think the reason that these two get compared a lot is because they're sort of more or less in the same price bracket, sort of. Today's prices, the Pod Go is €469 on Thomann. The Pod Go Wireless, which is the one with the wireless transmitter and receiver built in, is $555. And the HX Effects is $598. So it is still significantly more expensive than the Pod Go. And I think a lot of people look at these two things and think HX Effects doesn't have any amp models built in. Pod Go does have amp models built in. Why is it so much cheaper? So I'm going to start with the main differences. The Pod Go is something that you would use if you want to have a completely ampless setup. This has amp models built in, and they are Helix level amp models, which are fantastic. The HX Effects does not have amp models built in. It just has stomp box models built in. So this is what you would use if you're using a physical amp. At least that's how I use them. If I'm using an amp, I use the HX Effects. If I'm not using an amp, I use the Pod Go. And I'm going to start with the pros and cons of the Pod Go. So pros of the Pod Go. Main one is that you get Helix level effects, amps and cabs at a very, very low price. Now, these things sound fantastic. I can't say enough good things about the Pod Go at its price range, to be honest. It does have its limitations, but that's to be expected of the cheapest version of the thing that you can buy. It's got a very, very simple signal flow. You can only have one single effects chain, or signal chain, should I call it, on this, which for my use case is actually a benefit, and the reason is I've always been the kind of guitarist where I have an amp and I plug the guitar into the front of the amp and I have a channel switch, and that's pretty much me. If the amp's got the capability of a boost, great. If it's not, I kind of make do. So I don't really need a lot. I don't use effects pedals really. I haven't in the past. I've started to since I've been using this because they're there. But I don't really need them for most of the stuff that I do. So the simplified signal flow of this is something that I really like. The integrated expression pedal it's great to have. The fact that you've got a volume pedal there, click the toe down, you've got a wah pedal. You can see the LED indicator changing to red, which indicates that you're using the wah. When it moves to green, then it's a volume. Really, really nice sort of thing to have there, integrated without having to add external things to this pedal. And another pro is that it's very, very familiar. If you're familiar with Line 6 products, it's got a familiar layout, familiar tones, and you kind of know what you're doing with it if you're used to this kind of thing. The cons for the Pod Go, one of them is that it's not part of the Helix family of products, whereas the HX Effects is. So Pod Go has its own software within the computer when you edit your tones and things like that, which also means that you can't take a preset, a saved preset from the Pod Go and install it into a Helix product, even though they're the same effects, the same amps, the same cabs. They're not interchangeable in that way. And another reason that I think it's a con that it's not part of the Helix line of products, the Helix family, is that there is no guarantee that the Pod Go with its limited DSP won't get left behind in the future. If Helix continues to get better and the software continues to grow in size, in like cumbersomeness, we'll call it, that's definitely not a word, but it is in this video, the Pod Go could get left behind. It could get to the point where this hardware cannot cope with the software where the Helix is going. So I think that's kind of something to watch out for. These are not linked with regards to updates. When you get a firmware update for Helix, the Pod Go doesn't necessarily get that same update. There are already certain effects that are missing from the Pod Go with regards to Helix level effects, such as certain pitch shifting effects. The Pod Go just can't cope with them. So, if they're not important to you, if there's certain things there, if you're like me, where your signal flow or your chain is usually very, very basic anyway, then this is more than enough. It sounds amazing, especially with the latest update that I installed in the video a couple of weeks ago, which, if you don't want to watch the whole thing, it's fine. I did waffle on a lot. Another con with this is that even though there are 9 blocks within this, only 4 of them are assignable to whatever you want to assign them. So I don't know if you can see this this display here, but we've got a volume block there. That's always a volume block. The wah block is always a wah block. These two, I've got them as distortions for like gain stages, but they can be assignable to what you want. You've got an effects loop, that's always an effects loop. The amp block is always an amplifier. The cab block is always a cab. The EQ block is always an EQ. And these last 2 can be assigned to what you want. That could be quite limiting to somebody who has like complex things going on. But then if you've got complex signal routing, then this probably isn't the pedal for you anyway. So, one of the main limitations where my use case is concerned with this is that you can only have 1 amp block per preset. And what that means for me is that if I want to use 1 amp model for my clean tone and another amp model for my overdrive tone, it's not possible with this. I'd have to switch to a different preset, which is fine. It's a lot better than the old pod was. The old pod, the kidney bean shaped thing, that used to have like a full 1.5 second dropout of tone while it reloaded the new preset. This isn't quite as bad as that, but snapshot mode is designed to be able to go from one tone to the next within a song. But if you can't change the amp, then it's kind of like you've got to compromise on one of them. But this is the cheapest version of its type in the Line 6 sort of array of products that they put out. Another con with this is actually with the expression pedal. I did say that the expression pedal is a pro, but it's also a con. And there's a huge design flaw with this expression pedal. For context, I live on the south coast of Spain, so when I'm playing outdoors, it's very often very, very sunny, and the sun is powerful. And this expression pedal works with an optical sensor under here that senses how close the toe or how far away the toe is from the sensor to dictate what to do with whatever that's signed to, whether that's a volume or a wah. If you get a really strong beam of sunlight that shines underneath here, it can really mess around with the expression pedal. And I was having a problem with the Pod Go for a couple of gigs where the sound was just disappearing. It was like the guitar was being switched off. And after stopping mid-set for like 10-15 minutes trying to figure this thing out, my keyboard player and I figured out that when I was bending down to try and figure out what the problem was, the guitar was working fine. And we figured that it was because my shadow was being cast over the front of the expression pedal that the sun was no longer shining on the sensor and it was working fine. And when I stood up, the sound would just drop. So That's why I've got this gaffer tape on the side. It's not because the pedal's broken. It's fairly robust, this thing is. The build quality, by the way, is nothing compared to the HX Effects. This is a solid metal thing. This is a little bit plasticky feeling. It's not flimsy, don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's a bit of a design flaw with this, which actually makes the expression pedal, I don't use it. It makes it obsolete for me because I can't take the risk that I'm going to be playing one day and the sound's just going to drop mid-song. It's just not something I'm willing to compromise with. So that's the Pod Go. It is so powerful and so good for what I use, but full disclosure, I think I probably will switch this out at some point for the Line 6 HX Stomp XL, because that does everything that this does, but it is part of the Helix family. It does have the flexible, complicated signal routing, so you can have 2 parallel signal chains going at once and all of that kind of thing. And with regards to expression pedal, I'm not using one currently, so I don't need to use one. But there is the possibility to use an external expression pedal like this one. This is the Mission EP1L6, designed specifically for Line 6 products, and this is actually what I use with the HX Effects currently. So moving on to the HX Effects, I've got some notes here, so I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. The pros of the HX Effects. As I said at the beginning of this video, I'm only using this when I'm using a physical amp, and this thing has very powerful signal routing. You can have two signal paths going at once to do different flexible routing and things. I don't really use that for that kind of thing. I'm a very simple setup kind of guy, you know. This is part of the Helix family, so each update that Helix gets, this gets as well. So it's always going to stay in line with that Helix stuff, which I really like. Something that I love about the HX Effects is its ability to switch the amp channel. So I'm using a Blackstar HT Club 40 Mark II. It's a 40 watt all valve Blackstar combo with a single 12-inch speaker. And with a single TRS to TRS cable, I can connect this up with one of the external foot switch ports in the back to the back of my amp, and with this switch here, I can switch from clean to overdrive on the amp itself, which means that I don't have to have this and the channel switch of the amp. And where that comes into its own is with regards to snapshots. So if I go into snapshot mode within here, I can set up, sorry, I've not got snapshot mode set up properly currently. Wait a second. So I've got 4 snapshots, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I can set them up to be, for example, snapshot 1 could be a clean channel on the amp with a little bit of chorus and a little bit of reverb. Snapshot 2 could be like a crunch rhythm sound where the amp changes to its overdrive channel, the reverb and the chorus are dropped out, another gain stage is added with a overdrive pedal or something, and something else can happen, all with one click of a switch. So it allows for, if you plan ahead, you can have different sounds set up without having to tap dance over a traditional pedal board setup. So that's something that I really like about this. And if I go back there, you can see that I've also got amp voice. So the reason I use a TRS, not a TS cable, is so that I can have the amp channel and the amp voice on separate foot switches. So I can switch the voice from one to the other and the channel from one to the other, which is really cool. Also, something that I love about this is when you connect it up with the 4 cable method, and I'll explain a little bit what that is, but it adds loads more flexibility to the routing of the individual effects within the chain. So the 4 cable method allows you to have a cable between your guitar and the HX Effects. Then you go out of the HX effects loop into the effects loop of the amp, then out of the effects loop into the amp, back into this, and then out of this into the front of the amp. So it allows you to put things like reverbs and delays into the effects loop of the amp, but things like modulation effects, flanges, phasers, and overdrives and things like that into the front of the amp. So depending on what the effect is, you can send it into the correct part of the amp. So I really like that. Something else to consider with the HX Effects is it's a really powerful MIDI controller. You can use this to control not only a guitar tone, but other things like lights and all sorts of cool stuff, if you can be bothered going through and figuring out how that works, because MIDI is not something that I've ever mastered. So is what it is, you know. So the cons with the HX Effects, which are a few, one is that there are no amp models, so you can't use this as an ampless setup unless you've got it on a pedal board alongside something like the Strymon Iridium, which is, you know, these amp in a box things that were all the rage a couple of years ago. Supposedly they're really, really good, and I almost bought, actually, before buying the Pod Go, I almost bought a Strymon Iridium to do exactly that. Maybe I will be able to get my hands on one at some point and test it out and see which I prefer. If anyone from Strymon's watching, hit me up. And another con is that there's no expression pedal, but as I said before, I use this expression pedal alongside the HX Effects, and something that I love is that it's got two external foot switch outputs, so I can use one of them for the amp switch that I went over before, and another one for this, so I can use the expression pedal for things like volume and wah. And something that's really cool about the HX Effects is that the expression pedal can be assigned to any parameter. So for example, if you've got a overdrive pedal modelled on here, you could use the expression pedal to control how much gain is on the sound, which is quite incredible. You can also use it for things like decay on a delay setting. So you could have a delay pedal on, and the more toe forward you give, the more repetitions of the delay you get. You can also assign it to multiple parameters as well, so you can do some really weird and wonderful stuff with it. I really like the HX Effects. It's a seriously powerful piece of kit, but the Pod Go is a seriously powerful piece of kit as well. I love both of these, and I think they're both well worth what Line 6 charge for them. You know, there's a lot more cons that I've listed to the Pod Go than there are cons to the HX Effects, but at the end of the day, they're two completely different beasts. The fact that the Pod Go can be your amp and all your effects in one unit, I mean, look at the size of it, it's tiny. And yeah, the HX Effects I absolutely love alongside an amp. They're just different things, different tools for different scenarios, aren't they? If I'm playing in my band Gecko Blaster where I've got a keyboard player alongside me, the guitar isn't always the principal thing, so I don't need to be able to hear my guitar like coming from behind me being fired out of a 40-watt valve amp. I'm not that fixated on it. My principal instrument, in my opinion anyway, is my voice, so I'm just there to kind of keep up the back end, keep the rhythm going. Whereas when I'm playing with my three-piece band where there's just me, a bass player and a drummer, I like to be able to hear the guitar. I like it screaming out behind me, and this thing is powerful. So anyway, I'm going to leave this video here just so that I'm not waffling on like I did in the last video. But as I said at the beginning, if you're interested in guitar and music related content and you want to see more of these kinds of videos and you get anything at all out of my content, please consider subscribing using the subscribe link down below. I'll love you forever if you do. And there's lots more exciting content coming in the near future. Until next time, take care. Thank you very much for watching, as always. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.